Hello again and welcome to the first Ask a Woman of 2019 at a time when, because of a long Brexit year ahead of us, many of us don't know whether to laugh or cry. Our guest today is perfectly placed to help us navigate it. She's been a political special advisor and a stand-up comedian almost at the same time. She's been a commentator, a columnist, but was raised a long way from the Westminster bubble up in Glasgow to an Indian Muslim immigrant family, which helped shape some of her fascinating story. She's also helped prep Labour leaders for Prime Minister's questions and has just brought out a book on that subject too. So I'm really delighted that for our first Ask a Woman of 2019 to welcome Ayesha Hazarika. Great
Hello,
to see you.
Thank you. So it's a real honour to be sat on this sofa.
I know, and it's on the very day that Plan B gets put to the Commons by Theresa May as we speak. I mean, just giving me your sort of snapshot feel for where we're at. You said you wanted to stop being wound up by Brexit as your New Year's resolution.
Yeah, that was my big New Year's resolution, to not get too excited by every twist and turn on Brexit. So I'm trying to keep myself quite relaxed about this, because I suspect that we're now so used to these Monday outings at the dispatch box where Theresa May stands there for sort of 2 hours getting battered on Brexit from both sides. But at the end, a few words that she once uttered still rings true. Nothing has changed. So I suspect she will stand up and she will make a tiny effort to say, look, there'll be something on the backstop that I might be able to negotiate, but it really won't be enough for people and we'll still find ourselves stuck. I characterise it as a Brexistential crisis. It's like we're never leaving this place. You know, I feel like it's so hard to kind of make any progress on it.
I mean, we keep hearing, if I hear the sort of line uncharted waters, it does sort of drive you slightly crazy, but people generally, I think, are feeling just admired in this now, aren't they? I mean,
They are. I think both politicians in the House of Commons, in the House of Lords, the media class, but most importantly, the public are just so astonished and ground down and sort of baffled by the mess that we find ourselves in. And I think there's two big problems with Brexit on the horizon. There is I suppose, the sort of public policy and economic impact of what is going to happen, whatever happens with Brexit, however we leave. But there's a big social and political price as well. I think trust in politics was already low in this country after the financial crash, after the expenses scandal. Politicians have never had a particularly good rep, but I think this takes things to a new low, whether you're a leaver or a Remainer or somebody who's just in the middle and you want to get on with your life. I think people are just aghast at how politics has failed this big moment in our history.
Yeah, for those who don't know, you're an arch Remainer, of course, and you were co-hosting the People's Vote rally when the extraordinary scenes unfolded in the Commons last week when she went down to such a defeat. But, I mean, to push the People's Vote is to push something which could potentially drive us into an even more toxic place, isn't it? I mean, that's part of your...
It's interesting
sort of
because I was quite a recent convert to the People's Vote, and actually I had been quite worried about a second referendum beforehand, and I was thinking about the arguments that were against it. For example, saying, look, it could be the rise of the far right, and there could be a lot of division. But then I sort of looked at what was happening in Parliament, and I came to the conclusion that we needed one because of a number of things. First of all, there is just this political gridlock. This impasse is not going to be broken, and there are no signs of any sort of breakthrough. And also, there is a huge amount of division happening in society. People are raging about this issue. It's splitting up families, couples, friendships.
You're asking them to do it all over again, though, with the second referendum.
But I do think we have to take the temperature with the public again, because everybody seems to sort of have this weird premonition that they know what the people really, really want. We're 2.5 years from when we had that last referendum. There's much more information and flesh on the bones about what the options are on the table. And I want to get a sense from the public about what they want. By the way, if the public came back, now this would be a horrendous outcome for somebody like me, if the public came back and said, right, actually, we still want to crack on.
Well, we told you the first time.
But then we have clarity. We then know, I take it as sort of eyes wide open, informed consent. My other terrible analogy about this is that if Brexit and Parliament is like a blocked toilet, you need something to unblock it, and see this people's referendum or a second referendum as a chance to just unblock this big mess. And there may well be a sort of mess that comes with it. But I just think that we're so stuck right now, and I don't see any way of breaking the impasse. We have to go back to people and say, look, what, do you still want to stay? Do you still want to go? If so, how do you want to go?
Do you think people generally, though, have any idea, clearly, for example, where Labour actually stand on this, though? I mean, when you start to think about how either an election or a second referendum might play out, there are big questions about just the clarity around where people stand on it. Have Labour put a clear message out, in your view?
No, they haven't. And I have been quite dismayed about this. Now, I think Jeremy Corbyn played quite a clever strategic game on Brexit, particularly at the last general election campaign, because he was sort of able to ride two horses at once. He was able to appeal to Leavers. He himself has got a strong Eurosceptic background, but he was also able to, appeal to the Remainer heartlands. And actually, lots of students and young people, kind of came towards Labour because they were like, actually, they're quite sort of Remainy. And austerity, their anti-austerity thing was a big thing. But now we're in a genuine political crisis. And we are at that crunch point where the Labour Party needs to make a decision. You cannot ride two horses forever. You have to make a choice in politics. And I think Jeremy Corbyn is just not providing that leadership.
What do you want to hear from him?
I want him to now say that we've lost the chance to have a general election. The party conference agreement was if we couldn't get a general election, the option we would look at was a people's vote. And that's what the majority of Labour Party supporters, lots of Labour Party voters want that as well. And that's what, quite a lot of the trade union movement as well.
And kiss goodbye to all those Labour voters that wanted out. 60% of Labour constituencies are lost in the referendum.
But a huge number of Labour supporters do want that. Remember, one of the things about Jeremy Corbyn that's been very important to his success is that he said, I want to listen to party members. I don't want to be this sort of like autocracy. I want to listen to you. And party members have spoken and said, we want you to support a second referendum with Remain on the ballot paper. So I think the other thing to be very aware of that statistic, I understand the need to try and keep this sort of coalition of people together, the Leave voters, but beware of taking your base for granted as well. Lots of Labour voters do care about Brexit, and me as a Scottish person, remember what happened in Scotland? Labour took its voters for granted. We had the view, people in Scotland will always vote for the Labour Party. That's just what they do. And then we got wiped out by one MP in the 2015 general election campaign. So we have to be very careful to never take our voters and our supporters for granted.
I mean, there's been a lot of focus on, Theresa May's balancing act to try to hold this party together. But the truth is, both big parties are prone to a split at this point, presumably because of this.
Now, the split question is very interesting. I understand that tensions are running very, very high. I think for the Labour Party, it's less split on Brexit than the Conservative Party. The split in the Labour Party is a small number of people, including the leader of the Labour Party, having one view, and actually the majority of the Labour Party.
Really fundamental breach. That
true, but in terms of if you're going to split on that level, I also think for the Labour Party, I'm sceptical about a new party forming. There's a lot of chat about a new kind of centrist party. My issue is this: who's going to lead it? There isn't this kind of, saviour Macron sort of figure. And let's be honest, Macron is having his own problems. The shine has kind of come off it. What's it for? What is the purpose of this new party? I don't think you can have a new party which is just about Brexit. It also has to stand for some policies. And if you look what's happening across European countries where new parties are surging, they tend to surge from the extremes, either the extreme left or the extreme right. It's quite hard to insurge from the middle. What do you want? Grown-up policies, when do you want them? Well, at a time when it's convenient. It's very hard. And I think a lot of Labour MPs as well, I think although they feel very, very frustrated, it's a big thing to leave your party and, cross the floor and maybe start a new party with other people. People are reminded about what happened with the SDP. And so, never say never, but I do think the idea of a sort of a new party it may start, but whether it would be successful is another question, because our first past the post system as well does make it hard for a new party to do that well.
I mean, it's another of Theresa May's big days, as we started off with. From a female perspective, and it's interesting, I've spoken to our other guests on this, about this as well. I mean, relating to her as a woman, frontline politics, what sympathy or empathy do you have for her position?
My sympathy has sort of run out now. I think when she first started, when she got elected, or she wasn't elected, when she became Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party, even though I'm a Labour person, I tried to put my sort of tribal loyalties aside, and I thought, actually, this woman could be good for the country. She was very different in style from David Cameron. I thought she could have been a sort of Angela Merkel type figure. Maybe we do need somebody who's less showy than the previous Prime Minister, maybe a detailed person. And actually, when she'd made her speech about burning injustices, on the steps of Downing Street, I thought, yeah, OK, this could be a fresh start. And I do think also the circumstances in which she became Prime Minister, this huge mess made by a man that a woman was now clearing up, I sort of thought, actually...
That's quite a strong narrative.
Yeah, I sort of thought, she had a great opportunity to really govern in the nation's interest rather than her party's interest. She could be a sort of, mother of the nation type sort of figure. But I think she squandered that opportunity. I think she has not grasped the politics of the situation. To become Prime Minister at a time when the country is so divided on Brexit, Parliament is so divided on Brexit, your own political party is so divided on Brexit, the way to have approached this was to be really reaching out to people, in the Labour Party, in other different political parties, across the regions and nations, to Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland. She should have built from the beginning a coalition to try and get this sort of through, and she didn't do that. Now, very late on in the day, she now says, I want to have talks with other people, but really it's too little, too late.
Should Corbyn have gone in to talk to her, do you think, in this last couple of days?
I would have liked Corbyn to have gone in. I understand that he would have had some very, very strong lines, but I think in politics, particularly when you're in a position of national crisis, the grown-up thing to have done would have been to go in, have talks with her. Now, if the talks were going absolutely nowhere and she was not prepared to act in good faith or talk in good faith, I think he could have then said afterwards, look, I have tried, we went in, but there's,
So he wasn't behaving as a grown-up then?
I don't think any of them are behaving as grown-ups, quite frankly. I think one of the great tragedies about where we are right now is I think the public looks, and, my book is called Punch and Judy Politics, and they just look at this chamber of people just yelling at each other, shouting at each other, sort of trying to stab each other in the back, and people are asking the question, where are the grown-ups right now? Where are the people who are courageous enough to come out and try and do something to sort of stop all of this madness? And I don't think they see it in the Prime Minister, and I don't think they see it in the Leader of the Opposition.
Just to go back onto the turf about women in politics, though, it is extraordinary, isn't it? Because we went through the Me Too scandal, which then morphed into the Westminster scandal, where the lid was lifted on, sexual abuse and harassment at Westminster. I mean, when you look at the last month, I mean, it's almost, when we've seen what has been happening to women and other female professionals in and around Westminster, it's almost as if we hadn't gone through that, really. I mean, the abuse that women are getting on the street, Anna Soubry in the street.
Yeah.
What have you made of how this sort of toxicity is played out on the female stage?
Well, I think the level of sort of aggression aimed at women in public life is just horrible. And it's been this way for quite a long time. It's obviously heightened with the tensions on Brexit. I think it's important to say a lot of men have also been threatened and abused, and the journalist Owen Jones has been harassed, and like lots of people are kind of getting harassed. But there is a particular vitriol and venom directed at women who have the temerity to have a strong political view. And anybody who puts their head above the parapet in politics, whether you're a commentator, whether you're a politician, a newsreader, it's like women are trying to be, I think, frightened into silence. I think that's part of the sort of mentality of people who are so vitriolic to women. And I'm afraid the great tragedy of social media has been an incredible thing in many ways. Everybody can be a commentator, everybody can be a really active participant in politics. that's great in many ways, but it has unleashed this horrible, horrible, dark force as well. And I think social media is used by a lot of people to try and particularly silence women. One of the things I feel very troubled about is I do a lot of work with young women, encouraging young women to get into politics, to have a voice. And quite a lot of these young women say to me, I'm scared about doing it because I see the abuse that women get, or they even venture a tiny wee bit into the world of Twitter where they put forward a political view and then they have a mob come after them. And that has a very bad chilling and censoring effect on women.
How do we get the genie back in the bottle? That's not quite the right way to put it, but I mean, is there a point at which you can row back from this now? I mean, it feels to me, I can't see where the change suddenly comes in it.
I have to say, I think that genie is well and truly out the bottle, and it has morphed into sort of a very big beast now. I think it's very, very hard to go back to a point of civility. But what I think...
That's really depressing.
It is, but what I do think, where we could have a chance is if we all... The one thing we can all do, and this is not about social media giants, there's lots of stuff they could do as well. We all as individuals, whether you are just, a normal person making a comment on Question Time that you've got angry about, whether you're somebody in the public eye or whether you're a political leader, an influencer, the one thing you can do is you can check your own behaviour and your own conduct and your own language when you go to tweet or when you talk about things. And I think if we all sort of took a bit more personal responsibility, that at least would be something. For example, I feel very depressed that many politicians now, use language and inflammatory language in a way that is very, very damaging. I, as a Muslim woman, was aghast at the comments that Boris Johnson made about Muslim women being terrorists and looking like bank robbers and letterboxes and all of this kind of thing. And actually, abuse against Muslim women went up as a direct result of the words he said. And I was talking to some charities about this who do a lot of work in terms of hate crime and stuff. And one of the things that's really interesting is they say that when people see politicians using that kind of language, it gives them the green light to use that language themselves and think those things, because political leaders are leaders. They influence how society behaves. So I would like us all to take a bit more responsibility, but I do think we're in quite dark times on that. And I'm not being Pollyanna-esque about it. I think we're in a very difficult time.
I mean, you raised it just then, but just to rewind your amazing life story, really, growing up as the child of Indian immigrants in Coatbridge in Glasgow as a young Muslim girl. And you charted your way to the sort of dizzy heights of right in the thick of it, and I don't use that lightly, at Westminster, and then as a stand-up comedian as well. I mean, do you sort of look at where you've got to now and then just look at that little girl in Glasgow and think, wow?
It does feel sort of quite mad. I mean, I think my parents still lament the fact that I'm not married with I'm not a doctor and I'm not like married with children. I just got an honorary doctorate in law,
yes,
so I think
from
that
your old university.
So that's ticked one sort of tiny box. But I think for me, I remember asking my mum as a wee girl, and my mum said to me, what is it that you want to be when you grow up? You can be a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, because that's like the immigrant sort of way. And I remember her saying, I like politics and I like writing and I like making people laugh. Spitting Image was my favourite programme growing up. And I remember my mum saying to me, Beti, which is a sort of nickname for, in Indian, and Beti, a girl like you, that can never happen for you. It's not for people like us. We can't do things like that. And I think in a way she was trying to protect me, but that sort of got the fire in my belly. And I was a bit like, well, why can't somebody like me do that? Why not? And I think I always just quite enjoyed putting myself in situations. As soon as you said, right, you can't do that, it made me think, right, I'm all the more determined to do it. But I don't think I had a sort of clear sense that this is what I wanted to end up doing. I think I basically I sort of thought, right, every opportunity I get, I'm just going to take it and see where it goes. And I also decided quite early on that if something was quite scary, then it was probably quite good for me. And that I had this thing that I think fortune does favour the brave. And I kind of made myself do scary things like stand up and all that type of thing.
Because just to fast forward a bit, I mean, you started doing the stand up when you first worked at the civil service as a press advisor. So you were doing it at night when you were sort of superwoman by day and then Batwoman by night or whatever it is. But I mean, I mean, doing stand-up is a different sort of bravery to what most of us would put ourselves through.
I know, I think it's like a cry for help, basically. It's just cheaper than therapy. It was such a weird thing because I did have this crazy double life. Like, I'd be at the Department of Trade and Industry being like a serious press officer, you know, for the then Patricia Hewitt was the Secretary of State. And then I'd go and change in the loos and I'd be off to sort of Manchester to do in a car with tons of comedians, and I'd get back at like 3 a.m. and then be at work the next day. But what I found was really useful about that and very good was that it put everything in perspective, because sometimes before I started doing the stand-up and I was working as a press officer, I would get, you know, very intense about my work, and I would sort of, it would become the be-all and the end-all, and I would take everything home and get really stressed about it. And obviously you do that with sort of politics and things because you're very passionate about it. But doing stand-up was so terrifying, it just put everything else in perspective. So even if I had a really bad day at work, I'd suddenly be like, I'm on stage about to make people laugh. This puts everything in sort of perspective. So I found it like quite a good sort of palate cleanser for my brain and for my emotions. It was quite good to sort of put everything in perspective. And also, nothing is as hard as standing up in front of a room of people and
trying to make them laugh. Absolutely.
Apart from Brexit.
Apart from Brexit. Yes, we say that as the footnote to everything. But you did find a way of morphing one into the other for part of your political job when you were special advisor to Ed Miliband in particular, and you were preparing him for Prime Minister's questions, which you write about in the book Punch and Judy about PMQs. And it's just how you got that humour in, because it's a perilous thing to try out in the Commons, particularly at Prime Minister's questions, isn't it?
It was. I mean, when I first got my job as a special advisor, I was really kind of quite zooming along with my comedy career. And in fact, I just had like this great meeting with Rory Bremner's production company, and they wanted me to do sort of writing, and I was like, yes. And I thought I could maybe do both, but actually my first boss in politics, Harriet Harman, was quite strict with me, and rightly so. She said, look, you can't be a special advisor and be a stand-up comedian. You can't really be like briefing the press by day and then telling rude jokes on stage at night. I was like, okay, fair enough, that doesn't sort of quite work. But what was interesting is I felt frustrated. I was like, I have to have an outlet for my sort of comedy. So I really encouraged every politician I worked with to try humour. And Harriet was fascinating because at the beginning, you know, she was a bit like, oh, I'm not sure if I want to do this, because also being a woman in politics, we get so much scrutiny and, you know, everything, you know, we're criticised so much. I don't want to make jokes and they don't go right and blah, blah, blah. And then she stood in for Gordon Brown at Prime Minister's Questions. And we prepared a joke because she had just been photographed wearing a stab vest.
Yes, I remember.
And she was up against William Hague, who was like famed for his like wit and humour. And all these political journalists were ringing up going, oh, it's going to be 6-0 to Hague. He's going to wipe the floor with Harman. And I was like, I am not having this. I am not having this, not on my watch. So I persuaded her. I said, look, he's going to come after you in terms of wearing the stab vest. So you have to have a good joke to sort of hit him back with. And we came up with this line saying, look, we're not going to take fashion advice from the man in the baseball cap. Now, not the funniest joke in the world, but it really brought the house down in the House of Commons to the point where everybody, even he was like laughing, but quite shocked. He did not see it coming. And it was just such an extraordinary moment that, like, I remember in The Sun and like lots of, you know, newspapers, and it was like Harman makes joke, you know, it was sort of a huge moment. But also it kind of made me realise, and I think it made a lot of other people realise, humour can be such a powerful weapon when it comes to political communication. And what I loved about that moment as well, there's a huge amount of sexism about who can be funny in politics, and also who can be funny in general. And it was just so brilliant to see, you know, this great experienced feminist politician, Harriet Harman, absolutely knock it out the park and sort of explode that myth that women couldn't be funny.
Now, I hear you do a very good impression of Ed Miliband. You saw him at very close quarters. I mean, I sort of interviewed him before, and also when we did the leaders debate, I saw him at very close quarters in a very sort of tense. So come on, let's have a bit of Ed Miliband.
Oh my goodness, you're putting me on the spot. Well, I will tell you one very good story about Ed Miliband, which was when I actually prepped him for those leaders debates. But when we were prepping for PMQs, he would get really, really nervous because David Cameron was quite a beast to him about how he looked, how he sounded, his brother, his dad, his politics, his policies. And my job was to try and help keep him calm. So one day we had done 6 very good questions on the badger cull, which I know sounds very much like the West Wing. And he was getting really, really, really stressed about it. And we were just about to go into the House of Commons. And suddenly he turned around and grabbed me by my lapels. He's like, honestly, Ayesha, I've got to ask you a question. I was like, what is it? Is it something that Ed Balls has said? He's like, no, honestly, like, it's really important. And I was like, what is it? Like, and then he was like, just look at me honestly and just answer me this question. am I a badger? Because he'd had this little bit of
white
white
in his
and then he had this procession of shadow cabinet ministers that were brought in to just look at Ed and go, and he'd go, am I a badger? And they'd be like, has this man gone insane?
Proper thick of it.
And it's a miracle we didn't win the general election, isn't it? It really is, with that kind of strategic thinking going on behind the scenes.
You've tried to put yourself in for selection for MP. Not quite come off. Would you still want to do it?
That is a very good question. So I really wanted to represent really a seat in Scotland, sort of near where I grew up. And I went for selection in the run-up to the 2010 general election campaign, and I wasn't successful. I tried a number of times. And I think it was very much because of also the sort of wave of sort of Scottish nationalism that was kind of coming through as well. And it actually was probably the right thing, because I would have lost my seat in the subsequent sort of, landslide in 2015. And it is a question I ask myself quite a lot. I think for the time being, it would be difficult for me, I think, to get selected. And also, I'm really enjoying being a political commentator. I think in some ways I have like a lot more freedom to express exactly what I feel, because right now there's many things I agree with on Jeremy Corbyn in terms of austerity and everything, but there's lots of things I really profoundly disagree with him on as well. And I think the party at the moment has a real desire for people who are just slavishly loyal to the leadership. And I don't think I would be able to be that, candidate or MP right now. That may change in the future, but I think for the time being, I'm quite enjoying having the freedom to just be able to say what I want when I want to say it, without having to think, gosh, do I need to get do I need to get that cleared with the leadership? Is this going to make is my name going to have a black mark against it in the future? And I get enough abuse from people on the left and the right on politics.
And you've got the most amazing mix, as you say. You've got a column, you're doing podcasts, you're commentating on all sorts of broadcasters around the clock, really, because of Brexit.
Yeah.
It's a nice time to sort of look how far a woman like you has come, and to sort of reflect on what might have got you there. One of the things we've been asking each of our contributors on Ask a Woman is if you were sitting down for a dinner and you could invite 3 key women, either from the present or the past, to join you for dinner in these turbulent times, who would it be?
So this is such a great question. So I think the first woman would be Barbara Castle, because I am such a fan of what she did with she brought in, the first really big important legislation on equal pay, the Equal Pay Act. We saw it in the film Made in Dagenham, but also I think, there were not many women in politics in her era. And she managed to do something absolutely extraordinary. And she had to be incredibly tough, because there was not this clamour to sort of support her. I think she basically had to really almost threaten to resign to sort of get this key piece of legislation through. So I would love to have dinner with her. I'd love to ask her what it was like for her being a woman at that time. How did she get her stuff through? How did she cope with just this very, very male part of the Labour Party? So that's the first person. The second person is somebody, these are all dead people, unfortunately. I'm going to have a séance at my dinner party. The next person is a sort of comic writer who I have just loved. I love her books, I love the films, and that's Nora Ephron, who wrote When Harry Met Sally. She's written a huge collection of books as well. And I just think, for me, humour is a really important part of my brand and the stuff that I sort of love. But I thought she wrote with such wit, but also real warmth, about what it is to be a woman and to have women's lived experiences of love, of relationships that go right, but relationships that go wrong, the ageing process. And she does it with such kind of self-deprecating, honest wit. I just absolutely love that. And the final person I would like at my dinner table would be Michelle Obama, mainly because I can't get tickets to see her. But also
Impossible.
I think her story and her story with Barack Obama is extraordinary. I'll never forget the night that he got elected. And I was with a fabulous political organisation called Operation Black Vote, because a big passion of mine is more diversity in politics. And even though I may myself never be an MP, I want to support as many women, but also people from minority backgrounds to become MPs. So they're a fabulous organisation. And we were at a party, and there were just sort of tears streaming down everybody's face to see a black family that had won this incredible thing, and that they were going to be in the White House. And I just remember thinking, this is a proper moment in history. And regardless of what happens and what they do, and I say they because she was as much of the team as him, she was a huge player, they have already changed history. They have already, for a whole generation of people of colour, they have exploded the narrative that, you know, you can't achieve what you want. And I thought that was amazing. And I'd love to talk to her about her experiences, what it was like to be the First Lady. And hopefully maybe she might run for president herself.
I was about to ask you, is that what your dream outcome of?
Oh, well, my dream ticket would be her or Oprah Winfrey. But I'm very realistic about look, I mean, the mess America is in at the moment is incredibly depressing. And I just think we have to be very realistic about who is going to follow Donald Trump. I would love it for it to be a woman. I'd love for it to be a woman of colour. But I think we have to ask ourselves some quite honest, difficult questions about not just American society, but our own society as well.
It's been fascinating to talk to you about it. There's so much more we have to talk about. Inevitably, always the same with these chats. Thank you so much for your time. Lovely to read Punch and Judy Politics on your take on PMQs and an exploration of its history. It's great fun too. So have a wonderful 2019.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thanks for coming in to talk to us on Ask a Woman.
Thank you. Pleasure, pleasure.